Good evening and welcome to this week's salon session from Dementia Researcher. I'm your guest host, Lucy Mackintosh, a senior research assistant from the University of Hertfordshire, and I'm delighted to be with you here this evening, and luckily a much cooler evening than what we've had in previous days. Each week in the salons, we bring together researchers from around the world to exchange ideas, challenge assumptions, and share practical knowledge that supports your careers and research journeys. Tonight's session is focused on a small but mighty piece of writing, the conference abstract. Whether you're submitting for your first poster or looking to get selected for an oral presentation, your abstract is your gateway. It's your first impression, your pitch, and sometimes your only shot at getting noticed. And with a few words to work on, it can be deceptively difficult to write. Helping us unpack this topic are two brilliant researchers who've been on both sides of the conference process. First, we have Zsadanyi, a PhD student based in Barcelona and New Zealand, whose work focuses on neuroimaging in Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. And we're also hopefully going to be joined by Dr. Wasiu Balogun, a postdoctoral associate at the University of Pittsburgh, developing fluid biomarkers for dementia care. They'll be sharing their experiences, strategies and tips for creating abstracts that don't just summarise your work, but get people to notice it. So for those of you who are new, just let me explain a few details about how these salons work. So each of our speakers will present for 10 to 15 minutes, and then after their talks, we'll have a little chat, take your questions, and then hopefully hear from you with your own tips that you would like to share using the chat. Anyway, that's enough from me. So let's hear from our first speaker, Sara.
Hi. Good morning from New Zealand. Significantly cooler, I hear, than the UK is at the moment. So I'll just share my slides with you all. If that's working well.
Yep, that's perfect. We can see that.
Great. Hi. So yes, as Lucy's just presented me, I'm Sara. I am currently based in New Zealand, but doing my PhD at the Subpar Memory Unit in Barcelona. And so in the context of this conversation that we're going to have today, you're planning on sending an abstract to a conference. So at first glance, I think that an abstract is quite a simple thing. You've just got a few hundred words. You just have to summarize the work that you've been doing for months. But I'm sure that a lot of people are going to agree with me when I say that a conference abstract can sometimes be one of the most difficult things that you do, right? So since I'm a sucker for a clunky analogy, I'd like to use one to talk about how we can craft a really great conference abstract. So in this analogy, the abstract of your work is like your carry-on luggage. Now, being from New Zealand, I know that packing a carry-on is usually pretty different, since I'm always packing a carry-on to survive 24 hours or more of flying. So instead, let's think more of the weekend trip to Rome with your friends. You really don't want to pay extra, so you'd only be taking a carry-on with you. And the conference is the destination you want to be at. But the airline or the reviewers will only let you board the plane if you follow a certain set of rules. So in this case, the abstract or your carry-on luggage will have to fit the size and weight requirements. So you have to pack light and you have to pack smart. So thank you for bearing with me so far. The reason for this analogy is that when we've spent many, many months working on some kind of studies, we can get very attached to the work that we have. And you kind of want to cram it all into your abstract to show just how much work you've done. I know from experience, during the first few months of my PhD, I spent weeks and weeks figuring out how to pre-process some MRIs. Then I spent a full month manually opening all these MRIs, segmenting some lesions on them, and then even more time learning how to code an R well enough to produce the data for my first abstract. So when I saw that I had to summarize all of that work into 350 words, I found it very difficult to part ways with explaining just how much work had gone into it. The thing is that the weight limit or the word count on your abstract is fixed. So the process of writing an abstract is really one of figuring out what is important and necessary for this trip that we're about to go on. So typically an abstract looks a little bit like this. Think of this as like your packing list. Although it can seem quite prescriptive, there's actually a lot of wiggle room in here. So you should definitely be packing 3 full outfits for a 3-day trip to Rome, but you get to decide whether you're going for loud Hawaiian t-shirts or just a plain t-shirt. So first off, you've got your title. Here, I like to really think about what was the study about and how it was achieved. So as an example, you might use white matter hyperintensities predict cognitive decline in older adults. The title is specific, it's a clear tagline, and it avoids using any jargon. You also want to try use active language so that you can engage your reader. And you can tell from a title very often what kind of methods have been used. So to pack a specific, clear, engaging title and then leave the more vague and jargon-heavy phrases. Then onto the background. This section cannot be a full account of your research area. Instead, you need to be very careful that you're using this section to tell us about the gap in the literature and why this study in particular was necessary to fill that gap. Here, I think it's really important to think about your audience the same way that you would think about the type of clothes to pack based on the season. So just in the same way that you wouldn't bring your winter jacket on a trip to Rome in mid-August, try to avoid explaining the obvious basics of Alzheimer's disease to a reviewer for an Alzheimer's conference. The audience already has the background knowledge to understand your abstract in this case, so make sure that you tailor your background section to your audience. Next up, we've got the aim. Usually this is one sentence. You should be very direct and specific. So try to avoid any language that kind of dances around the problem. Think of getting straight to the point with this. So phrases such as "we aimed to" are a really great way to start this off. Make sure that it also adds information rather than just simply repeating your title, which I have seen happen a few times. Then onto your methods. These are quite tricky. I know there's that urge, you want to include every scan parameter and inclusion and exclusion criteria, every statistical nuance that you've put into your study. But unless the point of your study is actually to present a novel method, try to really zoom out here. Tell us the population, the kind of data that you used, and then the more detailed information about methods can go into your main talk or your poster. Next up, your results. I think this is the most important part, to be honest. So you wouldn't stuff your passport into the bottom of your suitcase. Your passport is like your main finding. You want to be able to pull it out straight away to show it at border control. So this is your most important, impactful finding of your study. And I would really be happy to see if you don't bury it as sentence 3 of your results section, and then have it surrounded by all these other less impactful findings. So if your reader remembers just one thing from this abstract, what should it be? Don't make them dig for it, put it right in front of them. So if you were writing about my example from before about how white matter hyperintensities predict cognitive decline in older age, make sure that you include a strong statement such as white matter hyperintensities were strongly associated with MMSE. And don't hide it within a long results section that also includes basic findings such as individuals with dementia diagnosis were on average older than those with mild cognitive impairment. And also in the results section, of course, sometimes abstracts will include some space for tables and for figures. So if you have this opportunity, definitely take it. Ensure that your images are reinforcing the main messages of your results section. And then finally, the conclusion. This is not the moment to say more research is needed. Instead, tell us, what do your findings mean? Who should really care about them? Clinicians, policymakers, patients, and what could change based on what you found. Make sure that you really use this section to convey relevant or how relevant your findings are, how urgent they are, and what the implications are. So in the lead up to big trips, I tend to have a lot of nightmares about having to pack my suitcase when I'm already running late for my flight. In terms of writing an abstract, this would be leaving the process to the last possible minute. So remember, when you are writing an abstract, you'll probably need to run your abstract by all your co-authors or your supervisors before you submit. And this process can be very valuable for also getting feedback on the strength of your abstract. By starting early, you also give yourself time to refine your writing or to repack your bag. For instance, you might find that already by the time you've got into your aim, you've used up more than a third of your word count. And so you might need to reassess and repack. And then also during the drafting process, you can take a look at abstracts that have made it into conferences or have won prizes. And maybe your co-workers could even share some of their past abstracts with you to see how it's done. So I hope that this exhausting analogy has made some sense, and that you'll actually be able to pack your carry-on without thinking. And so to just wrap up, here are a few key takeaways. Firstly, of course, pack light, pack smart, focus on what's important, what's timely, and what gets the reader excited to see more in your poster or your talk. Then don't bury your most important item. So make sure that the important results are really standing out for your reader. Then tailor to your destination. Use the space to highlight what your audience doesn't know yet and why that matters. Clarity is more important than complexity. So using clear, direct language will always win over using jargon or complex language. And then finally, don't panic pack. Good abstracts aren't rushed, they're well packed. So I hope that you are all able to make the most of this opportunity to create a conference abstract. And yeah, I'll be very glad to hear some questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Sara. And I loved the analogy. I definitely think that's something that I will bear in mind and probably use in the future. One thing that really stuck with me is you said about the title. So it's got to be kind of short, clear, obviously summarize what you're talking about, but also engaging. Do you have any tips for how to make a title stand out?
This is actually one of the hardest things for me when writing any kind of academic research. I know that there are some brilliant researchers out there who can make wonderful puns and all these sorts of things to really get you interested in their paper or their abstract. I would say, though, that try to maybe avoid that until you're really good at making titles. But on the whole, the most maybe simple way to come up with a title is to really think, what did I do and what did it show? So I tend to go for that. So maybe my titles are not very exciting and flashy, but they will hopefully then stand out because it shows you the main results straight away and how we got to that point.
Perfect. Thank you. So you think stay away from humour until you've kind of got the mix between humour and academia right.
Yeah, that could be a good takeaway.
Fab. And just another question for you. So obviously you gave a really good detailed outline of what you should include and, you know, how kind of lengthy it should be. Would you say you would change your approach to how you tackle an abstract based on whether it's an oral presentation or a poster presentation that you're submitting for?
I think that it's quite dependent on the conference. I know a lot of the conferences that I've been to, the aim is really to be to get an oral presentation. And so it's not super often, maybe I haven't been to the right conferences, but it's not super often that I've had to specifically tailor an abstract for a poster or for an oral presentation. I don't think that I would tailor it any differently, to be honest. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. So now we've got our second speaker, Dr. Wasiu Balogun. I'm not sure if you have a presentation that you would like to share. If so, there is an icon at the bottom.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that Sarah has actually said all of the things most of the things I want to say. So my work is very easy. So I want to say that everything I want to say is based on my experience, because there is no one rule for how to write an abstract. So it's based on what the conference wants and what you also want to write. However, I feel like abstract itself is it's a word that has different meaning to different people. So I just thought to give a very short definition or understanding of what an abstract means. So it's a very concise and clear summary of your presentation content. So we just want to have an idea of what you want to present, either an oral presentation or a poster presentation or a virtual presentation. So it's like wet the ground for people to have an idea of what you want to present. Maybe it's something that they are interested in or not. So, and a very good crafted abstract allows the reader to quickly, like I said, to quickly grasp the main point and assess its relevance to their interest or goals, and decide whether to engage with the full presentation. So it is very important to, like they say that first impression create a lasting this thing. So that's just like what an abstract is. So what are now the things expected in an abstract? Like Sarah said, I just have a summary of four, two or three things I think should be in an abstract, depending on the conference. So some conference want you to have your abstract section spelled out, like to have an introduction, an aim, the methodology, the result, and the conclusion. However, some other ones want you to lump them together and have just the body of work only. So the introductory part is just basically where you explain your research question, and while you are answering the question you ask in the first instance. So I noticed that there are more birds in this city. So then I think that I want to know their number, so something like that. Okay, as a neuroscientist or as an Alzheimer's dementia person, I noticed that there are many care homes in this city. So I want to know their number and how they are operating. So that's a research question, and then you know why you want to do that. Okay, so that we can have an understanding of how they operate. Then this shouldn't take more than one or two, maximum 3 sentences, because abstract itself, like Sarah said, is you are constrained on what you write. Maximum is 350. I think AIC conferences like that, in AIC and others, the maximum is 350. So even some other conferences, I think they have less, like ISN. So then the methodology is just to answer how you're doing the research. Okay, so I go out every Tuesday to the different care homes to monitor them. I collect data. So the methodology is just to provide a framework of how the experiment was conducted. Then the result. So actually, most conferences want you to present result that you've already performed. So actual results. However, there are also conferences that want preliminary data or expected results, like just to tell them that this is what we are expecting or this is what we've gotten so far, so that by the time the conference time comes, you have gotten more results and you can present that in your poster or in your oral presentation. So the result could be either, like I said, result that you already have in hand or the result that you're expecting. Then, depending on the words that is allowed to be on the abstract, so you could also put significance, and this has to do with, so what do your result point to? What are the implications of the result? And is there going to be, if there is space, and if there is if they want you to, and will you do anything in the future regarding the result? So these are basically the things or the criteria of an abstract. Then I just have this slide that I feel like this is my main message. So an abstract has 4 C's. It has to be complete. You don't submit an incomplete abstract to a conference. It's probably going to be reviewed and it will be rejected. It also has to be concise. You don't want to write everything that, like Sara said, you don't want to write everything that you did in 6 months. You have to make it very clear and concise, and it also has to be very cohesive. You have to make sure that you are passing a story. You don't just write A and the next thing is Z, so it has to be A, B, C. And I feel like there are typically things you don't expect in an abstract, like your title. So there's no need to put your title in an abstract. Dr. So, Mrs. So, I'm Professor. No, there's no need for that in an abstract. And even your name. So most conferences have a section to put your name and even the title of the abstract. So you don't add that to the body of the abstract. And also I know that there might be exception. Most conferences don't want insight to cite your abstract. It has to be straight and direct wordings. You don't need to put references either in the abstract or at the end of the abstract. It's not allowed in most conferences. Then just a short reminder for myself and everybody listening. So you have to read the directions of what you are writing. Then it's very good to proofread. So you don't want to finish writing the abstract and submit it immediately. There's a need to go over it and be sure that you are writing something that makes sense. And also, it's good to have as maybe you are a PhD student or a master student or a postdoc, have your mentor read it, so that they say 2 words are better than 1. So that in case there's any mistake or any error, they could help you identify it and fix it. And also, you need to eliminate jargons, any wordings or any word that other people cannot understand. There's no need to put it in an abstract. And also eliminate narrations. You don't need to, like Sarah said, sorry to say I had to go back to, because I think that our presentation was very detailed. So any narrations that are not important had to be eliminated in the body of an abstract. So I think that's what I have. And thank you for listening. And if there's any question,
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yes, please do put any questions you have or any comments in the chat. I have seen that the chat is being utilised. And depending on how many questions get put in the chat at the end, anyway, we'll be able to answer your questions and our speakers will go into the chat and answer. We might be able to allocate some time to actually talk about your questions within this live stream. Based on kind of what was said in your presentation and a comment that was raised, BMJ Open have said that structured abstracts, so those that do use headings such as background, methods, results, are rated more highly than those abstracts that don't. It's always worth double checking the submission guidelines, whether that is something they would like, but if it doesn't mention it, I think it is always worth having those headings in. I have a question for you, Wasiu, based on your presentation.
okay.
I'm not sure whether you've ever had this situation, but when you are working on a project and a conference comes up that you really want to attend, you want to submit an abstract, but your piece of work isn't quite there. You haven't quite finished your analysis, or you're still kind of working on it, but you'll be done for the conference. How do you kind of work around that? So when you kind of got like a work in progress, how do you work to make an abstract but you don't quite have all your results yet?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is to discuss with one's mentor to put have an understanding of how to navigate that, because there are times that you could submit an abstract, like I said, expected results. You even though you don't know what the result might be, you have an idea of what you probably be getting, you understand, so you can tailor your writing based on what you expect the result. Of course, the introductory and the methodology part has already been done, or you are doing that currently. Probably the problem is the result, so you have an idea of what the result will be, or if the conference allow to put expected result, that we are this is an ongoing project, and by the time the conference come, we'll have some result that will present. It's allowed to state that.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We will now move on to the kind of Q&A, online Q&A, where I have some more questions for you and we can look at some of the questions in the chat. If you just want to stop sharing your screen just so that we can kind of see both our speakers. Perfect. Thank you very much. So my first question for both of you, and it's up to you guys who wants to answer first. So in terms of, we spoke a bit about, keeping out any jargon, getting to the point, not having too much narration. But what would you say your strategy is for writing abstracts using plain English, but when you have got quite technical stuff to discuss? So obviously, as you taught, your research is in like biomarkers and things like that. So how do you kind of get around using plain English when you're discussing your work?
Yeah, it's very tough, considering that there are some words that cannot be changed. However, you're still expected to make sure that the person that will read the abstract, or other people that will read the abstract, get the message. So the most important thing, even though some words cannot be understood by a layman, however, the flow of the sentence should be something that people can get. And if they are interested more in the research, that's something that will make them to come and see your presentation. Or they could also, the word is now a better place, they could google it and see more about the term that they don't understand.
Perfect, thank you. And Sara, do you have any advice or experience with this?
Yeah, I think about this quite often because a lot of my colleagues aren't native English speakers. So I tend to use my network a little bit. We like to share our abstracts and to take a look at things that we've written together. Use my network doesn't sound so nice, maybe. It's a sharing community. I think definitely that having sort of a drafting process, and this is why I tend to start a lot earlier, that's quite useful for being able to read and reread and share with other people what you've written. Because you may find that your colleague who sits right next to you and also does neuroimaging analyses all day will understand your abstract perfectly. But if you take a look at something that's completely out of your realm of research, although you may be in dementia research, you're looking at something that's completely out of your field, it might be quite helpful to have that person's input on whether or not your language is clear and everything makes sense. Definitely, it's hard to get around very specific terms and things. But I think that is also where thinking about the audience comes in. So, I mean, I know I've been harping on about the same topic throughout my presentation of white matter hyperintensities. So I do know that that is quite a specific term, but if I'm afraid that a abstract reviewer is not going to understand that, and I think it's already important to do this, adding in a very short explanation of what that is into the introduction section can help you to get across your idea and hopefully make it quite clear for the readers. Yeah, so...
Yeah, I think sometimes you just can't get away from it. And so having a clear kind of explanation, like for me in my research, I work a lot in patient-reported experience measures. And so using that constantly can use a lot of words and take up a lot of room. And so, you know, even though they say try not to use acronyms, I think sometimes, especially when you have a very limited word count, acronyms are needed. And same when you are working in research, there are only certain ways that you can phrase things. Thank you both. So a lot of abstracts for conferences and even for some like kind of journals, if you're trying to put in, have a very limited word count. So it's around 150 to 350 words on average, with some having as little as like 100 words. So obviously, you know, you've both spoken today about how to structure it. You've both given some guidelines into like the length of it, so whether it's like 1 or 2 lines here or there, or just one straight line, like for aims. Do either of you have any kind of like resources or structures or kind of templates that you can recommend using? So, you know, that you've come across, have there been any really good templates?
I think AIC, for those who I think they have a template that people can look if they, especially for those who want to submit an abstract for AIC. So I think AIC have a template and it's very good. And also other conferences like ISN, that's International Society for Neurochemistry, they also have a template. So I know for AIC because I think they have a template that you can use.
Perfect, thank you. Do you know of any, or
say that I have found a specific template? Yeah, no, again, I do tend to take a look at abstracts that colleagues have written. And I think also if there are past conferences that have had sort of abstract competitions and things like that, it might be nice to take a look. But no specific templates, no, that I can think of.
No, that's fine. I mean, both of your presentations to me included quite great templates if you are a first-time abstract writer or somebody who hasn't quite nailed down what needs to be included, and you know how to separate out the word count into those parts. So I mean, that was really informative. again, like I'm not sure if either of this applies to you, but have you ever been rejected, or have you ever had an abstract rejected? And what was kind of the lesson that you learned from that experience, if you have?
Sarah, you want to go first?
I haven't had a rejection yet, but I haven't sent a lot of abstracts. I guess the only applicable sort of thing I would say here is that maybe I've sent an abstract hoping for an oral presentation, but getting a poster. I think really my lesson from that is just to kind of be quite happy with where I'm at. Sometimes a poster can be a much needed redirection if you really don't feel like doing an oral presentation. Yeah, but no real takeaways. Sorry. That's fine.
Yeah, and for me also, I see. I submitted abstract, and for they ask you to submit if you want them to consider for both oral and poster. So I submitted for both, but I got for poster, even though I would have loved to present for oral. But my experience with abstract rejection is not total rejection. It's just to make some corrections. So I've submitted an abstract for a conference, and it was returned back to me to make some correction before it can be accepted. So, and that gives a second chance to look at things again and look at how to better. That's also why it's good to always share your abstract with, or even the poster or abstract, anything with some other people, especially your mentor, so that they can use another eyes to look at it. So if other people have the chance to look at things for you, then there'll be little or no mistake.
Perfect, thank you. And I think exactly what you said about, rejection isn't rejection. It's just, a way to, make corrections and to improve. A lot of conferences receive 3 times like the number of abstracts than the actual slots they have. And so if you do submit an abstract for an oral presentation and you get a reply and it's a poster, I think, you need to take that away as a win, because they do have very limited slots, and they are very competitive to get in. And so if you do ever get your abstract accepted, I think that is a really big honor, and you should be very, very proud. So yeah, I think, sorry, just having a kind of look between things. I think the only other thing as well is that obviously when you're in like a new field of research and you do something like a literature review or a systematic review, how would you kind of change the way you present your abstract to do that? So obviously, sometimes it's quite literature heavy, so the results and even though there's still the methods and the results, obviously they're differently worded and structured. Do you think like you would change it up ever to be kind of have the introduction or the discussion weighted more heavily, or do you think it's always good to kind of split them evenly the sections?
Yeah, for systematic review, although some conferences don't accept them, but those who accept them, I think that the introductory part will take most of the section, because you want to explain the rationale for why you're doing a systematic review and why you want to present it to the conference. So there will be little or no there will be a very short distinct space for the method, because you would probably have just a little things to write about that. So the introductory and the discussion part are going to take a large chunk of that section of the yeah in the whole abstract.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think especially within the context of a systematic review, where it is systematic by nature, keeping the methods quite short because it's quite self-explanatory and good. and then really honing in on the introduction and the results and what we can take away from it.
Yeah. Can you think of any other examples of when you might kind of have to home in more on like a discussion, for instance, or even the results section?
Because I'm working in neuroimaging research, quite a few of the abstracts that we've put together have been a lot more technical or explaining a different neuroimaging technique that you might use. So in that case, it's not necessarily that the length of any section changes as much as basically what the focus of each section is. So I think in a very methodology heavy or new novel technique sort of abstract, you would spend a lot more time in the introduction talking about things that feel a bit more like methods in a sense. Yeah, that's the only other example that I could think of right now.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree with what she said. Yeah.
Perfect. No, that's brilliant. And how important do you think it is to tailor your abstract to a conference or to an audience? For example, if you're attending, quite a clinical conference versus one that has multiple stakeholders, so you have, some people with lived experience and things like that.
Yeah, that's very true because so you want to submit an abstract for a neurochemistry conference, you want to submit it to an Alzheimer's conference, the audiences are different. There's a group that are more interested in the chemistry part of your work, and there's another group that is interested in the Alzheimer part of your work. And like Sarah, like I'm very sure the abstract she's going to submit for AIC is different from what she will submit for HIA. HAI, right? Since they are two different set of people so you want to surely know the kind of people that you'll be meeting at the conference to know what to write for them. Because if you're talking about Alzheimer's to people in neurochemistry, yeah, they might have an idea, but it's not something that will quickly catch their attention. But if you're talking about the chemistry that has to do with the Alzheimer's, yeah, they are interested in that chemistry. So it's always very good to know the type of audience that you are writing an abstract for.
Yeah,
Perfect.
definitely agree with that. I think just as sort of a concrete example, I'm working a lot with individuals who have Down syndrome. And so when sending my work to a place like AIC, I have to very explicitly explain Down syndrome and why it's relevant to Alzheimer's disease. Whereas if I'm sending my abstract to a Down syndrome specific conference, which covers the entire lifespan of Down syndrome, then I have to really tailor my language and my introduction to explain how Alzheimer's disease is relevant in Down syndrome. So I think everything changes depending on which kind of conference you're sending it to, from the language to what you will include in your introduction and how detailed you'll be about certain things. Yeah.
Perfect. And I think kind of from my experience, a couple of so I do a lot in patient experience of kidney care, and there's quite a few conferences that patients are very much involved in the setup. They look at reviewing abstracts and things like that. And I think, tailoring the language, and, I hate the term kind of lay summary, but having it more in that plain English, especially when you have got, those with lived experience, or at least those from a non-clinical, versus when you kind of go to a more clinical conference. And then obviously with patient experience of care, especially when it's quite focused on the kind of biological aspect of kidney disease, or looking at the treatment side of dialysis, making yours relevant to them as well. So I think you've always got to look at who your audience is, a bit like when you apply to a journal. You look at kind of the reviewers and the editors and their interests and really appeal to that. Perfect. So there's been quite a lot of discussion and stuff in the chat. So I think maybe for the last 15 minutes, if we turn our cameras and mics off and just head into the chat, it gives people an opportunity to ask any questions directly. And I will just end the stream at 9 o'clock. So yeah, feel free to turn cameras, mics off, and we'll head to the chat now. Thank you guys, and thank you so much to our speakers. So just as well, while you guys are heading to the chat, I have just got some takeaways from this. So there's 10 top takeaways that have been generated by AI, which have been tailored based on the content of Dementia Researcher website. So plan ahead and follow guidelines. Start writing early and meticulously. Adhere to all formatting, word count, and submission rules. Common oversights lead to automatic rejection. Lead with a strong title, craft a clear objective title, ideally including your study design that conveys the core message at a glance. Frontline purpose. In the introduction, clearly state the problem and purpose using 1 to 2 sentences and avoid unnecessary background filler. Use the IMRAD structure, so organize your abstract into introduction, methods, results, and then conclusions. And then the IMRAD is widely expected and helps reviewers navigate efficiently. And as said, BMJ Open have said that those who use this structure and the headings are kind of favoured more highly. Be succinct. Each sentence must count and use 1 to 2 sentences per data point. Keep phrasing tight and prune any fluff. Focus on results and impact. Spend most of your word count on methods, results, and the significance. This is what reviewers care about. Report specific data, be precise, include participant numbers, key outcomes with effect sizes or confidence intervals, not just the p-values. Minimize jargon, avoid or define field-specific terms and acronyms. Reviewers and attendees may come from diverse backgrounds. Write in the active voice and plain English, so use direct active constructions, we examined or we found, and keep sentences simple enough to read aloud in one breath. And then review, revise, and proofread. Step away before revising. Use fresh eyes, ideally from someone outside your field, and check alignment with purpose, the word count, and guidelines, and then polish for a typo-free clarity. So they are the top 10 takeaways. We've had 2 fantastic presentations that have also given lots of details and said a lot of the same. And then this obviously will be available on the Dementia Researcher YouTube channel in a few weeks' time. So we are in the chat now. So if you have got any final questions or comments, please head to the chat where our speakers will be able to answer them. Thanks, guys.